Welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Marie, and today I will be joined by three other astrologers as we discuss the USA Pluto return. First of all, on behalf of us speakers, I would just like to thank Linda Johnson, Sue, Robin, and everybody else in EA Zoom who has created and continued this meeting format. Your efforts and your work are greatly appreciated by all of us. Just as each of us souls are unique and different, each of our presenters today will utilize the language of astrology as it works best for them. And so therefore, we want to just tell you from the very beginning, we may use different charts for the United States. And I think it is just reflective of the difference of our souls, just the diversity that exists in human consciousness as we all journey on our path to universal truth. So thank you for allowing us to share our perspectives with you. And I also want to just say that as we are recording this, we are just experiencing a moon conjunction to Jupiter at about 24 degrees Aquarius. We've just come through Mercury making a conjunction to Mars at, 8 degrees Scorpio. We also have transiting Saturn on the natal US South Node for those of you who use a July 4th, 1776 chart. So I think we've got a few dynamics going on here that also allows us to share a very deep perspective of the soul crises, as I'm calling it, that the US is experiencing. And so let me move the screen forward and see. Oh, we are working. I gave a presentation in September to an organization, and I had written up a little overview, and I read it today, and I thought I'm going to share it with you again. So let me just briefly say, the USA is in the midst of an identity crisis to the depth of its collective soul. In 2022, Pluto, the archetype in evolutionary astrology that represents the soul both individually and collectively, will 3 times cross over the zodiacal degree it was on July 4th, 1776. For the first time in this nation's history, its people are faced with evaluating all that has come before in the last 240 plus years and how it will choose to go forward into its next collective soul cycle. The intense debates of inclusion versus exclusion will not dissipate overnight, yet are crucial in understanding our choices ahead. The balsamic phase of transiting Pluto to its natal USA position has brought out all the ugliness and inequality upon which this country is based in every area of contemporary life. It is significant to understand that the new phase of transiting Pluto to the US natal position with Pluto, which includes Pluto's 20-year transit into Aquarius, will bring abundant opportunities to create new social structures and support systems. Just as the breakdowns of unnatural systems that do not support all species on planet Earth are necessary, the potential to create a new has never been stronger. The time is upon us to roll up our sleeves and make the effort to create the world we wish to participate in. Planet Earth is counting on us. And so, just briefly, I left this in case we have anybody new to the world of evolutionary astrology. In EA, we consider the soul to be that immutable consciousness that exists from life to life. And that soul, our souls, even our collective soul, has a dual desire nature to it. We want to separate from that which created us. Just think of the desires you have within your own soul. I want a better job. I'd like to have a better running car, new lover, whatever it is. We also have what we call the returning desire, which is that desire to know that from which we came. And we go through countless lifetimes naturally exhausting these separating desires until sooner or later that desire to know source starts to become more and more conscious. And eventually it's the only desire left. Now, I also left this slide in case somebody is new to EA. We look at souls being in different states of evolutionary consciousness or awareness. And I just want to state that when we speak consensus, individuated, spirituated, we are not talking best, better than, or less than. We're just talking about the fact that as souls go through countless lifetimes of experience, they eventually have more and more expanding states of awareness of the planet. Think outside the space-time they were born in. They create the norms, rules, and laws. Eventually, we start to individuate outside consensus consciousness and say, I'm going to think for myself. And eventually, beyond that, we then understand universal, timeless principles that have always existed. We can distort them, suppress them. We cannot destroy them. And so this is this broader understanding of which we need to have in understanding this US Pluto return, because it is creating a lot of fear in that consensus state of consciousness. And it will be for those of us who recognize how it is that we need to move forward, to help explain, to help share, to help give the example of how we can create better ways of living together in this collective group that we call the United States. This same principle happens to every collective group of people, no matter which identity or continent you may identify with. Now, I, over the last few years, have started using a chart that I discovered through NCJR by an astrologer named Michael Minkasi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He basically did several years of research over 18 different birth times on the July 4th chart. And the Library of Congress released more information back in the late 1980s, in which there was a letter discovered that was signed by Benjamin Franklin, and a couple of other actual signers of the Declaration of Independence, in which they said, our recollection is that we agreed on that paperwork somewhere between 9 and 11 a.m. on the morning of July. That history of the United States, in which we have waved and went back and forth between inclusive versus exclusive principles. As you can see on your screen, it's the Mercury retrograde opposition to Pluto. It is the Mars last quarter square to Neptune, and it is the Sun's last quarter square to Saturn. And so these three aspects are just so dynamic. Everything in the chart works, but they seem to have an emphasis in creating this inclusive versus exclusive perspective. And by the way, if you notice that grand trine in the background in the air signs, that's representative of all of the innovation that we have seen in the history of our country. The technological innovations, the democracy innovations, all of that future orientated energy that says, and we can create this and we can create that. So there is a nice trine in the chart in addition to these squares and oppositions. So briefly, inclusive principles are giving, sharing, and including. Exclusive principles, taking, hoarding, and excluding. They are not masculine or or they're not masculine or feminine. We can have excluding females. We can have including males. However, just briefly on the screen, let me just show you how this kind of works out from the perspective of the identity of the United States. We have two major political parties versus countries who have multiple party systems. And those two parties have intensely opposing views. And whether it's Democrats or Republicans, both parties are breaking down right now, as we've seen transiting Pluto balsamic to its natal position. We have both racial and national identity issues that go on, me versus you, us versus them, versus that melting pot that we were 100, 150 years ago. We have economic extremes of inequality going on in this country, and yes, other places as well, versus those waves that we had, the Roosevelt New Deal in the 1930s that, really created social support systems. We're going to see all of this stuff wave back and forth through this Pluto return that we are experiencing again throughout the entire decade of the 2020s. We have the USA exceptionalism. We are the best country on the planet. Well, every country will identify with that energy of thinking they are special and unique, because we all are on a collective level. My religion is better than your religion versus social acceptance. Probably don't have to say much there. We can relate to many things going on with that. Pluto in Capricorn for the last dozen years, though, has really brought up gender issues. And we have that consensus defense of the two gender traditional roles. Jeffrey Wolf Green would say the Marlboro Man and Betty Crocker, versus what the younger generations have been bringing up to us and to the table, whether we want it or not, the whole issue of gender fluidity, which, if we can look at it from the perspective of reincarnation, can really broaden our counseling for us as astrologers, but even the collective consensus world, understanding that it would be so much better if we judged less, discerned more, and allowed each soul to have their journey in any given lifetime. Maybe we will move towards that with the Pluto return and it moving into new phase here. We also have the whole issue that's in the news right now of female autonomy over their own bodies, i.e., the abortion rights issue is the biggest part of it, but it's broader than that. Can we do the same job and make equal pay to a male? And this is versus what I speak about so much, which is the patriarchal distortions and control of what we call natural law. And by the way, natural laws observe, correlate. You may know it for yourself. You don't have to take anybody else's word for it. Time constraints. I'm just bringing these issues up to say there's a push-pull between yesterday and tomorrow, and we don't quite know how it's going to turn out. It's going to be unique to each of us and how we choose to participate. Now, I just want to say, as we've had transiting Pluto balsamic to this natal Pluto position, depression and involution, okay? It is a passive polarity, the archetype of Capricorn. They're a natural part of our evolution right now, personally and collectively, and especially when our outer realities and circumstances no longer serve our soul or no longer serve us on a collective level. And what that does when we are turned inward, it forces us to go over to that Cancer polarity and have an emotional reflection in order to become aware of all the inner dynamics and motivations that cause us to create this current reality, that cause us to go, why don't I feel better? Why don't I feel comfortable? Why am I not happy with this group or that group? And so it behooves us to answer inwardly. Why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? We're doing it personally, and we're doing it on a collective level. And for many of us, it's creating so much confusion. All we want to do is go back to yesterday. But if we know anything about evolution, it is an evolving force. So it also behooves us to keep putting one foot in front of the other, the cardinal modality of the archetype of Capricorn, with however circumstances are presenting necessary changes to us, even in the individuating and spirituating states of consciousness. We still have our security mechanisms. We still have what makes us comfortable. We still can get into our own me versus you identities and us versus them identities. How well can we go inward and reflect and go, what is my purpose here right now? And how am I to participate on planet Earth right now? And if we're willing to do that, then we can be in touch with a reality that is creating opportunities for us to grow. As you see on your screen, we can have personal soul growth. We can have evolution in our career. We can heal with our family. We can find those resources that allow us to survive and flourish. We can create new reality structures, however, is necessary as we move into this Aquarian age of artificial intelligence and the key metaverse and all that stuff that's coming up for us right now. We can move through change. We can move through it individually, and it behooves us to be a part of moving through it collectively as best as we can. The worst thing individuating and spirituating states of consciousness can do is to hold themselves separate from the consensus world. That is why you saw on your screen, even though consensus is 70%, it's the smallest circle. And that larger awareness means we have a responsibility to help those who are confused or fearful or frightened to move through into tomorrow, however it is best for them to do so. Now, when we work with the word forecasting, I, as an astrologer, do not like the word prediction. I prefer forecasting. Astrology will show us the themes and patterns and that timing, but it does not give us the outcome. The future will depend upon the collective will to action. And we will see this take place in both inclusive directions and exclusive directions. And it is a great unknown as to how all this will turn out. It is my hope, it is my prayer, it is my intent that we will see inclusive principles and directions take hold in this country and on this planet in the foreseeable future. And one of the bottom lines telling us that this is the greater potential is the effects of climate change. It's going to continue to force us to debate our global collective future. If you've been paying any attention, it's going on right now, and we're going to have to step up. Hopefully, Pluto moving into Aquarius new phase, natal US, will really have us make some leaps in really trying to curb the effects of climate change and move forward. In the bottom line, evolutionary forces sooner or later overcome those resisting forces. And that will require us to live with nature or natural law instead of over nature. And I think this will become a significant issue and debate in the United States as well through this Pluto return. Because while this country has 4.5% of the world's population, we use about 25% of the world's resources. There is one area where it is up to us. I'm a US citizen. It is up to us to really change our relationship with resources on planet Earth so that it's not only sustainable for our future generations, it's sustainable for all future generations here on planet Earth. So this country, for the first time again, is facing the biggest crises of its history, and it involves anything and everything. If you pay any attention to news, we have constitutional crises in the three branches of government and amongst or between the three branches of government, just in case. That's the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Many, though, also feel we have a fourth branch of government, which is our freedom of the press, which is written into our Constitution. Today, that freedom of the press includes that big area of social media. Whew, is that a crisis, anybody? Oh, I can't remember. I think it was EA Zoom that I recently did a talk on the Saturn-Uranus squares, in which I brought out Mark Zuckerberg's chart and the Facebook IPO. And both charts have a lot of planets in Taurus and Scorpio. That Uranus transiting through Taurus is just going to tear up. Stay tuned. That's part of that broader social media picture that's happening as well within this. How are we going to relate to understanding that a fact is a fact? What is truth? Versus, to quote a political influencer, alternative facts. That was coined a few years ago. Stay tuned. Again, we're going to find out how all of this is going to turn out with all four of these branches of government. I have hope. I do have hope that we're going to have enough people start to recognize, wait a minute, we got to do something that makes sure that my children and my grandchildren are going to be okay. Now, as I said before, every part of the US, but there isn't a subgroup within this country. Choose your favorite interest, social activism, passion, belief, whatever. There isn't a subgroup within this country that isn't also going through a crisis just by the fact that they live in this country by a group. We're all up in the air. So we all have to work within our families, work within our small communities, work within the groups that we are attracted to or participate in, on how we want to see ourselves move forward. Because that is going to be that bottom line again. How are you going to choose to participate in everything? Now, just briefly, don't have a lot of time here, brought up the first Pluto return for the chart that I use, which will be February 21st of 22. It's going to be the time of the year where the inner planets right here. Let me get my little pointer ready for you. It's going to be the time period where these inner planets just happen to be moving right along with that first Pluto return going on. To me, I think this is really attracting an initiation with our personal values and how we want to act upon things. It's going to have all of us thinking about this collective past and how we want it to go forward. And I want to point out the fact that during the year 2022, transiting Saturn for the time period that I'm using, 9:37 a.m., transiting Saturn is going to make 3 passes over the USA moon. And the moon in mundane astrology is the collective. It is its citizens, it's its people, especially as we have our collective emotional waves as we identify with our country. And the moon has special rulership because we are Sun in Cancer citizens with this country. So Saturn is going to be smack dab on this moon through all 3 Pluto returns in 2022. I think that all of the gender issues are going to be accentuated. We will see whether we go backwards, forwards. Cardinal energy is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Let's see how this turns out. Net effect is growth, but time will tell. The other major thing that I want to point out to you is for the last 2 years, 2021, And you can see, whoops, close to, I'm sorry, well, both of these are, I'll speak to both of these. Neptune by transit in Pisces has been making 5 last quarter squares to that Mars in Gemini. And it is making 3 oppositions to its own natal position in the USA chart. This is what's creating the religious, spiritual identity crises for all of us. It is really triggering this energy within the US in which we say one thing and we do another. We notice that through the Uranus in Gemini. We notice that through the Mars in Gemini, but also square that Neptune. This too is what's brought such a deep share of that disillusionment, Neptune opposing its natal position. Who is this country? I don't identify with this country anymore. And time will tell how we see a spiritual rebirthing and self-identity within this country moving forward. When we move into that second Pluto return, and we could go on and on and on, but just briefly, what sticks out with the second one is the fact that in the summer, we'll be just off of our solar return. We'll have Mercury conjunct the sun. We'll have Venus making a conjunction to Mars. Here again, that whole value system, do we include or exclude, will be going on. The planets I spoke about before with Pluto, with Saturn, with Neptune, those outer planets, they're still going to be busy doing their thing collectively all through the year. Again, honoring time as we are moving forward. The last Pluto return here, that second one was July 10th. This third one is December 29th for my time period. The second one, in between the second and the third, we're going to have a Uranus North Node conjunction in Taurus. To me, in 2022, if I would do forecasting, stay tuned. There may be some Earth events that really shake us up, that really have us questioning, what do we value as a collective? Will it be gun violence? Will it be earthquake? Will it be those major storms? In the first 10 months of 21, the United States had 97 Earth events that created more than $1 billion worth of damage. I think that will continue to be a major theme for us through this next year. How are we going to adjust to the effects of climate change as we go forward? And so finally here, we'll have Venus and Mercury back in Capricorn on that third Pluto return. Again, lots of discussions on what's a fact versus not, and what do we value on some of those deepest levels. I apologize for going so fast through these 3 charts. I'm honoring the time. We could take each chart, and as astrologers, we could discuss them for hours and hours. Maybe a future Zoom meeting. I just want to give you the dates of Pluto moving into Aquarius, because just as we've worked through Pluto transiting through Capricorn for 15 years, and it's been balsamic to its natal signature. As we go into 23, 24, the very 2 years after the 22 Pluto returns for July 4th, we're going to have this shake up. We're going to have this 2 steps forward, 1 step back, going 2 retrograde cycles for Pluto with Capricorn and Aquarius. And here's the dates into Aquarius for you. I really think we're going to see some pretty major Aquarian revolutions going on. Time will tell what those are going to be. So finally, my last slide, what I want to leave you with is this concept of what we call primary water versus atmospheric water. And I totally invite you to go to this website, primarywaterinstitute.org. And on the screen, I have a hyperlink by one of my favorite heroines, Ellen Brown. She really works with the public banking movement. And what they're basically trying to say here is we can solve the drought crises that's going to come as the global warming occurs with climate change. And I am a love of mineral springs. My husband and I look for towns that have mineral springs that we can go soak in. And it dawned on me a few days ago, oh my gosh, that is primary water when I go soak in mineral springs. Totally invite you to look at this because we can dig wells into the Earth's surface. Not that we won't have desalination plants that will take place across the planet, but this is a much less expensive choice for all of us to be able to have that most primary of resources as we move forward collectively in this country and other places to help us survive in the years ahead. All right, thank you very much. And so now I don't know if we're taking questions or anything. I'm happy to answer questions, but if we need to move forward for sake of recording, that is fine as well.
Let's save questions for the end. How's that?
That sounds good.
If we have time.
Sure. So I'm going to stop share, and Daniel, if you could unmute. Daniel Fiverson is an author, lecturer, teacher, forecaster, and astrological intuitive. He has been a metaphysical practitioner and student of astrology, I Ching, Tarot, and Kabbalah since the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in the mid-1960s. His core astrological training has been through the work and teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green and his school of evolutionary astrology. Daniel also works with mythology and astronomy along through his astrology. So welcome, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Kim. My Virgo is shivering a little bit. You were not an easy act to follow, but I will do my best. And thank you. That was excellent. Very, very, very excellent. Thank you. All right, let me share my screen because I also have some slides. Can everybody see my slide? Yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, let me just move my stuff around so I can see what I need to do. So, astrology is about observation and correlation. But what we see above us in the heavens is really our own reflection. So I want to begin with some observation and correlation of the mundane world that we have just come through and are experiencing face on, really for this year and for the past couple of years. On January 6th, 2021, the nation witnessed an unprecedented attack on our rule of law as thousands of angry US citizens stormed the US Capitol. And all the indications tell us that they were incited by a delusional narcissist who abused his presidential power for his own benefit and aggrandizement. And I know that's, expressing my opinion, but I really can't see it any other way. Excuse me if I get a little bit political. He attempted to remain in office irrespective of procedures and traditions of 2.5 centuries of legal jurisprudence. And these are the issues that I want to address today. So I'm gonna, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm gonna just, run through some visual experience here of what we have just come through, because I think that what is happening with these Pluto returns is clearly reflected in our outer world at the moment. You'll see, I use a chart, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes, which is a year earlier. I have to, getting ahead of my story. Let me just kind of do my visual journey here first, and then we'll come back. So just last month, the Boston Globe said that the rule of law is foundational to a just society. At its core, it addresses judicial independence, access to the justice system, and other basic human and economic rights that depend on a fair system of laws, enforcement, and a government that is accountable to its citizens. It ensures that government is less subject to corrupting influences and more devoted to providing peace, public safety, and security. When the rule of law breaks down, government leaders operate for their own economic benefit or enhance their power, and governmental decisions are made behind closed doors without any public accountability. Without trust in the rule of law, a significant population will believe that the justice system is stacked against them, favoring the power of the connected. And I love this quote from Justice, excuse me, I'll make this a little bigger here, I can't read it. I love this quote from Sotomayor. She says, "I firmly believe in the rule of law as the foundation of all basic rights." So, you know, this is what our country, the principles that our country was founded on. These are the concepts and ideas that supposedly are driving us forward in the world, and they're all unfortunately under attack. For most of the 20th century, public opinion has been manipulated by the media. And it's been driven by profit motive and corporate interests. So are we surprised that we see Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and these social media, you know, moving in to fill, you know, some of the gaps or to take advantage of this entire area of manipulation of public beliefs and ideas that has become apparent to us? Fox News is owned by an Australian oligarch, and it's not news. It's strictly right-wing opinion and propaganda. In 1985, the Reagan administration revoked the Fairness Doctrine, which required broadcasters to provide equal access to the airwaves to all legally qualified for a given political office during election campaigns. Since the days of Nazi Germany, and I thank you, Chad, for bringing in fascism, because I think it's an important part of this. I actually considered it as the anchor to my talk, but I kind of took a higher road and decided to talk about the rule of law and not dwell on fascism, but it's here. Since that time, authoritarian regimes have known how to drive public opinion by controlling the collective narrative. And the problem is that those who listen to Fox News really believe it. Okay, they think it's the news. It's Fox News. This must be real. The Washington Post said that Fox News was Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes' attempt to shift the national conversation and muddy the waters of discourse in the nation. And it has been successful beyond their wildest dreams. By the time of the Trump administration, the network had moved on to full-blown propaganda and not only served as a mouthpiece for Fox News, but often set Trump's agenda. That's from Variety. Variety used to be a Hollywood, a spokesperson, but obviously they've taken a political slant. When future historians seek to explain the United States' perilous slide into authoritarianism in the 21st century, they will grapple with the role played in all of these events by Fox News and right-wing media. And there was a really fabulous article in Mother Jones. I don't know if any of you guys read it or subscribe to it, but you know, they said Fox News is cloaked in the trappings of news. Donald Trump is not the cause for the Republican Party's descent into madness. He's merely the result of decades of evolution that started when Jerry Falwell founded the Moral Majority, Rush Limbaugh picked up a microphone, and Newt Gingrich reinvented modern conservatism. It wasn't until Fox News was up and running that we started to see permanent changes in the electorate. And this graph that you see shows exactly what's happened, shows who Fox's viewership has increased from just above 0 in 1998 to 2.5 million in 2018. That was 3 years ago. This month, over 3 million viewers have tuned into Fox News during prime time. So the chart that I use, as I alluded to, is from July 6, 1775. I came to this chart from my friend Ariel Gutman, who had collaborated with Jim Lewis, who was the realizer of astrocartography. And Ariel told me that Jim believed that this was the actual true chart of the United States. And I don't want to get into any philosophical arguments because, you know, astrology works, so I believe all astrology works. I don't think that one chart is definitely better than the other, but I have found some amazing correlations in this chart and amazing expressions and explanations of the American personality, if we can call it that, or cultural behavior through this chart. The correlation, the history behind it is that late in the morning of that day on July 6, 1775, the Second Continental Congress passed an act to bear arms against Great Britain. And that legislative act by default severed all economic and political connections to our mother country. Well, when a colony, you know, declares war against its mother country, it ceases to be a colony. I mean, it's a given fact. The skirmishes with the British Redcoats at Lexington and Concord were defensive actions, but now they had hired George Washington to lead a standing army, which was an act that was passed the day before, and they adopted an offensive stance. They were no longer colonies of England. So this is all, you know, it's all on record. It's all in the National Archives, the Journal of the Continental Congress, 1774 to 1776. You can look it up. This is the actual quote of that act, that in our own native land, in defense of the freedom that is our birthright, and which we have enjoyed until to the late violation of it for the protection of our property, we have taken up arms. My perspective on the July 4th charts is that it was our country's first birthday. We had survived a year of warfare with the most powerful military force on the planet, and we finally had the cojones to say we are an independent country. But it really happened by default a year earlier. It's important to recognize, though, that whatever chart we look at, these outer planets move very slowly. The orbs are 8 and 9 years long from their ingress, from their inception to the point in which they go out of orb. So they really only differ by about a year in terms of their perfections. I mean, we're looking at 2020 versus 2021 or 2022, but this has been going on, really for the past 7 or 8 years. And I'm gonna kind of walk us through some of those years as well as we move past. What really grabs me about this chart are several things. With Saturn at conjunct Mars on the ascendant, I mean, we have always been out there as the world's police force. We think that we are the authority. We have aggressively exercised our power in the world in order to advance our own agenda and our own beliefs. Mars conjunct Neptune in the 12th house. Can you tell me that our history is not loaded with backroom deals and subterfuge and things going on behind the scenes? We're still dealing with it. Very, very little is transparent. If we had transparency, a lot of our history would be different. And Jupiter conjunct Uranus up in the 9th house, well, hello. I mean, if that's not a perfect, example of the expression of our beliefs and our philosophy and the way that we have pushed it out into the world, but much of the outer planets are really all in the same place in all these charts. They only differ by a degree. It's just the house that they're in. But at any rate, I'm going to walk through this and we'll see how some of this is playing out. So today I want to look at what I'm seeing as the greatest test of the rule of the law in our history. We have to remember that our country began as a social experiment. It was the first time in history that we know of, and I think we could go back, to some of the prehistory that's being revealed. But in terms of recorded history, going back maybe to the middle 6,000 years ago to Mesopotamia, we were the first government that was ruled by the governed, by the people of the people. It's unprecedented in recorded history. We are still a social experiment. That experiment is still unfolding. And there's an inconvenient truth regarding the US Constitution. Yes, it's a magnificent document, but it was written to protect property rights. There was nothing in the original document that protected human rights. It's only in the last 75 years that anything has been enacted or added to the Constitution to protect you and me, not our house, not our money, not our business, not our, and it's gotten worse because since Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruling, corporations are now people. It's actually become codified that property rights are really what it's about. Most of us were born in a post-World War II bubble or soon after. We don't know what it was like 100 years ago, but it wasn't like things are today. It's only in the past 75 years or so that we've actually seen any advancement. And it's, I'm going to say exactly what Kim just said. It's been a one step forward, two steps back for the entire 250 years. We're make some progressive advances, but then fall back. Our founding fathers meant well, but they were conditioned by their time, just as we are. Some of them were slave owners because the economy of growing cotton was all manual labor. Even when the cotton gin was invented, the increased production reinforced the need for slaves. The South required cheap labor in order to prosper. When we look at the Neptune opposition, and I'm jumping ahead of the story, that occurred in the 1850s. It's what led up to the Civil War. Slavery did not end with the Civil War. It just became segregation. The truth is that racism, xenophobia, and misogyny came over in the Mayflower. They burned women as witches. If they didn't like the way they dressed, they got burned as a witch. Our times are a self-fulfilled prophecy. The South promised it would rise again, and it did on the Capitol steps and in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. Okay, we've lived through this. And the current US Pluto return is underscored with that US Neptune opposition, which last occurred in the years leading up to the Civil War. And I'm going to examine the current charts to the US chart, and particularly the transits to Mercury, which is the ruler of the ninth house in this chart, that correlates to the judicial system and our body of laws, and to Jupiter, which is the ruler of the third house, correlating to the media. And Jupiter happens to reside in that ninth house, and it rules the third house as well. So you can see here the areas of the chart that I'm going to look at as we move through this talk. Excuse me. So this is the chart for January 6th of this year, which was when the US Capitol riot. And you can see the stresses here. Saturn is trining Jupiter and Uranus. Pluto in conjuncts the lunar north node and US Venus, which is the ruler of the chart. Eris is squaring US Pluto. Eris is trining US Eris, and Neptune opposes Neptune, squaring the lunar nodes. And I'm going to unpack all of these dynamics as we move through the next couple of slides. But this is the undercurrent of exactly what we're experiencing this year. So the question that I get asked by people, by clients that I run into, they ask me, what the hell is going on? Okay, what is it that's going on that's causing all of this turmoil and chaos? Well, if you've heard any of my talks in the past couple of years, you know that I have offered the Pluto-Eris combination is the primary causal factor of everything that has rocked our world for the past decade. This last quarter square, and this is the solar fire readout just for the transits from Pluto and Eris, has not occurred in 2,700 years. It was the Axial Age, which is a term coined by German philosopher Karl Jaspers. In those years, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Plato, Homer, Elijah, and Isaiah were all on the planet. The great thought streams of Western civilization came onto the planet in that time. This is the nature of what we're passing through. Eris is the goddess of chaos and discord, and she's inculpated, she's blamed for the start of the Trojan War. And the Trojan War, was brutal. At the end of the Trojan War, read the Odyssey, Odysseus goes down into the underground. Hermes led all of the heroes down into the underworld, and Odysseus visits them in the Odyssey. But a little known fact was that at the end of the Trojan War, Aeneas, who was a Trojan royal, and if you've studied any mythology, you've heard the name Aeneas. Virgil wrote the Aeneid about him, sailed to Italy, and he founded the Roman Empire. That was a culture that lasted 1,000 years, and its influences still imprint our modern world. So this is how I view Eris. Yes, she's highly disruptive, but she brings to resolution those crises, those situations which have found no other outlet for resolution. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but bitter pill is the one that heals us. You can see here, this is the range of this transit. It first came into orb in 2017. It's going to last through 2024. Not coincidentally, it coincides with Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. So these are the transits of Eris to the US Pluto. Okay. Now, since Pluto, transiting Pluto is conjunct US Pluto, the two planets are also currently in square aspect. The difference, though, is that transiting Pluto is going to move on and ingress Aquarius in 2024 and move out of orb with Eris. But US Pluto is not going to move. Eris has a 500-year orbit, and she's especially happy in her brother Eris's, in Aries sign. She spends over 120 years out of 500 years of that orbit in the single sign of Aries. Which means that she moves over each individual point in Aries 4 times in her annual retrograde. It takes her 4 years to clear a single point in Aries. So she's not going to move out of orb with US Pluto until 2052. So we're getting this Pluto-Eris combination from 2 different directions. It's quite intense. I've eliminated all the some of the ingresses and going in and out of orb, but this began in 2004 and it's going to go till 2052. It's really the foundation. I see the astrological foundation of the time that we're passing through. Just as a little bit of backstory with Eris. Eris entered Aries in 1927. She also, because of the nature of her elliptical orbit, Uranus, two cycles of Uranus fit into one cycle in Aries with Eris. Uranus immediately conjoined Eris a couple years later. We had the Great Depression, we had World War II and the rise of fascism. And then Uranus and Eris came back together again in 2015, and in 2016, we got Donald Trump, and in 2020, we got COVID. This is really what's really rocking our boat. These are the dates of the 3 Pluto returns as I see them, and I've correlated them to this year's events. The Capitol riot occurred only 6 weeks after the first Pluto return. And it also needs to be mentioned that they moved into orb, that Pluto and Eris actually moved into orb at the first week in January. And we also had Eris stationing direct the first week in January. Eris makes one annual retrograde like all the other outer planets, and they've all been in January and July. So every July, Eris retrogrades. Every January, Eris goes direct again. Well, on January the 10th, I believe, I don't have the date in front of me, Eris turned retrograde. So this is what was happening at the Capitol riot. We had the first Pluto return according to this chart, and we also had Eris stationing direct again. The second Pluto return, it was on July 1st, July 1st, and on July 6th, on July 10th, the January 6th commission was established. So we can see a pattern here of this outrage and this discord just unfolding right along the line of these returns. The third Pluto return is going to be on Christmas Day this year. And at the end of this talk, I have the Christmas chart, this third Pluto return, and Donald Trump's chart. We're gonna look at that. And again, here are the dates of the Pluto returns. So these are the transits to Mercury and Jupiter of the US chart from the start of this year through next year. And you can see that we've got the Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus pressuring Mercury. We have Jupiter and the lunar nodes pressuring Venus, which is the ruler of the chart. And we have the lunar nodes in Jupiter pressuring Jupiter, which is, is our media and is also the judicial system. Jupiter, is active in both of these areas of the chart, both the press and our judicial system. And then we have Jupiter opposite Saturn. So we're seeing disruptions and interruptions and restrictions and pressure to the due process of the law. The law is misapplied and misused by those in authority. The function of Uranus and Aquarius in the chart is the disruption and interruption of the crystallization that occurs in Capricorn. It shakes things up so that something else can be reformed and rebuilt in its place. Something else, we can move on, we can individuate, we can move away from all that consensus conditioning that we've picked up, across our lifetime, and actually, find our own true self. There are increased evolutionary pressures to proactively alter the judicial system and to extend protection of human rights, but it's definitely an uphill battle. And the country at large is traumatized, there's no question. And the past and future battle for control of the present. This is a dynamic of the nodes themselves. And legal pressures on the exercise of authority and excessive collective ego, not just in the public sphere, but in the private sphere. I think somewhere in this talk, I probably say this, I don't condone or agree with what happened on January 6th, but I understand it. I understand, these people being, the anguish and the trauma that they're feeling, and needing, they need a savior. They need somebody to, there's something known, there's a savior complex out there. Saviors need to find disciples, but the disciples need to find a savior as well. It works from both sides of the equation, and people need something to hang on to grab onto. In order to find stability and just to find a star to follow, to lead their way. We see here again more pressures. We have the nodes and Jupiter pressuring Uranus, evolutionary stresses that threaten to disrupt the rule of law. And here is the Neptune opposition. This is the extreme political polarity. It's the incongruity between beliefs, between ideas, between what people think, between their truth, between what it is where they find meaning. It's all just meeting in the middle, and in the middle is just a hotbed of anger and fierce confrontation. These are the Pluto returns, and here we see all of these actions on the nodes of the US nodes from Jupiter, and even a nodal square to the US nodes that occurs through this year and into next year. These are evolutionary pressures. They're creating crises that are compelling growth. They're compelling our evolution to move forward. So Pluto is evolutionary transformation. I think we all agree to that. And Saturn and Capricorn are form and structure. Change is the only constant. Okay. At the last transit of Pluto to 26 degrees, a new nation was born. And the founding principles stated that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed with their creator with certain unalienable rights. And these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. This entire process is on the table once more. And like I said, though I don't agree or condone the actions of those people who stormed the Capitol, I understand their angst. Our country has not lived up to its self-stated intentions. As of Q1 of 2021, the top 10% held 69.8% of the total US net worth, and the top 1% held about half of that wealth. The bottom 50% of US residents only hold 2% of all US wealth. As recently as 2011, that number was as low as 0.4%. Trillions of dollars are spent to send millionaires into space, while 500 million people in the United States are homeless. Over 30 million people have no health care. Militarized police take their frustrations out on people of color and ethnicity. And for far too many people, the American dream has turned into a nightmare. So what can we expect in December? Donald Trump is not going away, okay? Pluto inconjuncts his Mars, Jupiter opposes his Mars. We're all too aware of his penchant for violence and revenge. What crisis will he create to further his own interests? Eris squares his Saturn. This is a frightening implication of his need to exercise his authority. Pluto opposes his Venus conjunct Saturn in Cancer. What are his essential priorities? His own safety. Saturn opposes his Pluto. Will the weight of our body of law compel even more illegality? Neptune squares his lunar nodes. Will he descend into even deeper states of delusion? Nothing he has done or said makes me believe that he will allow himself to be prosecuted. Will the pending litigations make him a martyr? A martyr has much more influence and power than a savior. Will he flee the country to avoid prosecution? Will there be another riot or other public insurgency? There's another elephant in the room. We go to the supermarket and there are holes on the shelves where our favorite products used to be. We tell ourselves, well, they'll have some next week, but then they don't. Our parents and grandparents lived through the shortages and rationing of the Depression and World War II. Are we prepared for that eventuality should it come to pass? The United States has always been a social experiment. 11th house US Venus conjunct the lunar north node correlates to the highest ideals of freedom and equality. The inconjunct from Pluto catalyzed a crisis-driven course change. Evolutionary crisis is driving that experiment forward. The Neptune opposition generates the philosophical and ethical tug of war. Historically, the country has always taken 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Right now, we seem to be stuck somewhere in the middle. Pluto will enter Aquarius in 2024. The dynamics of Uranus are unexpected and traumatic. The generated events create objectivity, blowing away what we think we know. This is the nature of what we can expect over the next few years. I'm often reminded of the message that came to us from the Hopi elders at the onset of this century. Please take a moment to read this silently to yourselves. Thank you so much for listening to my rant. Peace, well-being, and safety. Namaste.
Thank you, Daniel. That was wonderful. I love bringing Eris into the conversation for all of us and allowing us to recognize what a deep underpinning that is, even beyond Pluto. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, Miss Sarah. Sarah asked me to read a poem for her that she says will just convey how she feels and what she thinks, if I have that correctly. So thank you. I love this, Sarah. For the love of my home, I study the stars to remember what was and what is here and now. By peering deep within the under of the world that we've come to know, I spy the way home again, where peace and joy are restored. Surely I am no one special, no name for me does suit, but all the same I smile when you see me, the sun beaming from the core of me. That is who I am, is I, is you, is we. Beautiful, sweetie. Thank you. All right, you know how to share your screen?
Thank you very much, Kim Marie. You read that beautifully. Okay, I'm gonna bring up, I don't have special slides. I just have my charts. I am super simple. I'm a very simple individual. I also want to say thanks very much for inviting me on. I'm a Canadian, right? So, you know, I'm a part of America's hat, so I'm not really America, but like we are very influenced by America, much like the rest of the world, right? Like it's, no one can deny that the United States has massive impact and influence on culture all across the world. And so it's an honor to have a chance to talk about this. I wanted to say too, Daniel, your chart's very interesting. I can't wait to have a look at that 1775 chart. Very, very interesting. But yeah, so I didn't, you know, I mean, Kim Marie hit so many of the transits that are going on spot on. Same with Daniel. I mean, the Eris square, the last quarter square with Pluto and Eris is so on point. I'm just gonna kind of see what I'm seeing in some very basic points with not necessarily the now, but the now will be experiencing over 2022 for the most part. So why I want to look at that is because I think there's some basic fundamental things that we are definitely coming upon with the United States' first Pluto birthday. You know, it's still a baby. Many countries don't even make it to that point, right? They kind of get aborted before then. I'm sorry, because I might use some language that is just a little bit, I'm a little not tactful, so I apologize. But like, what I'm saying is that this is huge, right? Like to be able to have your first Pluto birthday as a soul of a nation, and then people that live on that planet, I mean, in that country, on that space, and being not only that, a country as impactful as the United States. When we look at the United States chart, like I'm just gonna bring it up here. Here we go. I'm using the Sibley one. Everyone's charts are really interesting, though, I want to say. So I can't wait to have a kind of deeper look. Kim Marie's one was very interesting, too. Interesting how the IC and the MC correlate to the North Node and South Node of Uranus, which I found interesting. But yeah, so anyways, you know, when I think about the United States and when it came into being, it's, you know, there were some incredible ideals that I think were wonderful for the soul of a nation that was a big social experiment, as Daniel put it. You know, the first nation, as far as we know, to embark on this territory of freedom and sovereignty and the pursuit of liberty, you know, in such a way where the power is in the hands of the people. And then when we think about Pluto, pardon me, and Pluto in Capricorn, and the concept of control and of tyranny, but also of self-determination, right? The ability to become an adult and really grow into the form that you're here to be as a soul encased in flesh. When I think about that, and then this first Pluto return, which we have, you know, like we've all mentioned, we're having, you know, it's going to make 3 exact conjunctions over the course of 2022. When I think about that, where we're at, what we're observing in the world right now, there's definitely some room for improvement. I won't lie, you know, we're still seeing slavery happening. I know that it's not quite as overt as it was back in the 1770s, but it's still happening. A lot of our technology and our products our clothing, even our food come from slave labor. And it's a little scary. I mean, even cotton, is still to this day, like almost 250 years later, there's still a cotton trade that is where we're dealing with, like, the slaves are deriving it for us, And so to me, when I think about Pluto and that first birthday, which is so auspicious, such an opportunity for all of us, being that over all of this course of time with human rights, the things we've had to look square in the face with regard to where there's discrepancies in our ideals and our beliefs, over this whole 250-year period as a species, as a collective, with the US being kind of like on the world stage demonstrating this in a lot of ways. What we're learning is that it's not perfect, but we can do something about it. That's what Pluto and Capricorn's all about, is self-accountability. And so when I think about, like, okay, we've got the Venus retrograde happening very soon, and it's going to be on a conjunction with Pluto. I think like 26 degrees it goes retrograde. So it's pretty much, I think it goes into a slight new phase from Pluto, and then it goes whoop right back into a balsamic, down to about 11 degrees of Capricorn, I think. And so when I think about that, our values, our self-esteem, and then I think about the Taurus side of Venus, which is our security, our self-worth, and then also the Libra side of Venus, which is how we're relating to others, how we interact with others, our equilibrium and stuff like that. This Venus is kind of a big deal when it comes to this whole Pluto return. I mean, we see it happening not just in the first conjunction of Pluto, the first return, in February of 2022. We also see it in the final conjunction at around December 28th or 29th or so of 2022. So to me, what does that mean? I can only surmise that it can mean, well, I mean, as we know as astrologers, we can see so many facets of how these alignments can like what we can derive as far as knowledge and wisdom are concerned. But for me personally, what I've noticed is this is an opportunity for us to be very real about where we can essentially become more self-sufficient, where we can find solutions. I mean, Capricorn, I mean, I'm a Capricorn Sun, Mercury, and Venus, in a 6th house stellium kind of a deal. So I'm all about how can we fix the problem and make it better, right? Like, how can we create better structures? And so when I see this, I feel like what we're learning is, if we're willing to look at where we're tyrannical, where we're still maybe in an infantilized state, where we are, what was I gonna say? Where we are essentially arrested in a lot of ways, or even hardened, because the Capricorn energy, and I know this myself, having my sun on the south node of Pluto and Saturn, we can be very, very controlling just to feel secure. Again, Venus, right? If we're honest about that stuff though, and really willing to look at it from an individual perspective, as all of us, not just Americans, but everyone, because we're all dealing with these transits regardless of where we're at on the planet, right? But America is a beacon here as far as the opportunities goes, because again, iconic country, right? To me, I feel like this may have a significant impact on what America can salvage, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but with regard to where things are going, because I mean, a lot of people think the country's going to collapse. Like, let's not lie, right? Like, that seems like it could be a thing, but it might be a transformation into a new form with the whole Pluto concept, right? So what kind of form is that going to take is the question. And that's down to each and every one of us, what form that's going to take, right? And everyone has an impact on how that's going to play out. So to me, it's like, yes, we can look at the leaders, and trust me, I study very deeply into, well, like social engineering groups and whatnot, and some of the more hidden aspects of the rulership of the planet. So I have a pretty distinct awareness when it comes to their culpability, we'll say. But what I also know is when I think about the America chart, like the birth chart for America, it does have that Neptune in Virgo, right? And one of the things that I think about with that message or lesson that we could learn from that, connecting to source through that Neptune and Virgo, is learning to, how can I put it, not be a victim, to not at least identify as one, right? The American country is so Cancerian that identity is a huge thing. And the concept with the North Node of Pluto in general being in Cancer, all of us kind of want mom to come back and hug us and love us and tell us that who we are as a person is okay and that, you know, we're doing a good job. You know what I mean? And so some people will kind of go towards other authority figures to help lead the way. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Some people are perfectly suited to being leaders, but I also think where we're at right now with this, you know, this Pluto return for the US, what it's stating is what was happening back then. Like they were pulling away from the parent country. I think Daniel was calling it like the mother country, right? Like they were separating from that. We're coming back to that. And so I feel as though a lot of these crises are happening. And it's so on point that Eris is involved, because that discord needs to happen in a sense, that uncomfortable friction, so that, and these, of course, I say this so emphatically again, Aries moon, right? So it's just my opinion though, I just want to be clear. But from my perspective, like what I see is there's a huge opportunity for us to soften where we've been hardened for our survival, out of a fear that we weren't good enough. And, you know, I mean, I grew up in a family, African slave lineage. So I know fundamentally on a DNA level and also in my culture, what it's like to feel like you're automatically not a good enough person. You know, like there's something fundamentally wrong with you, that life's going to be harder than it would be for other people. And that's what we were taught. And yet at the same time, I think that if we're honest with ourselves, these are stories that we pass on that on one hand can be like, people suffered, there's no doubt. But at the same time, we don't have to carry that story with us. We can make changes. We can choose to follow the divinity within us, the dictates of that, and fully individuate. So I find it interesting when I look at, like, for instance, here, we're looking at Pluto return number 3. Just want to go back to the first one, Pluto return 1, balsamic Mars to Pluto, right? Conjunction there, technically. The second one we see, of course, Mars has moved on from there. It's not really in a trine, but it's moving towards a trine with Pluto, so that's promising. And then by the third time, what we're seeing is Mars is still moving on. I mean, it's not quite at this point of the return, but eventually it will hit an inconjunct when it conjuncts with its own natal Mars. But you'll notice that the third conjunction of like the third Pluto return, Mars is conjunct Uranus, the natal Uranus, which I think is promising, especially considering what Kim Marie pointed out so astutely, is that during the course of 2022, Uranus and the North Node of the Moon, the transiting one, they're going to conjunct too. So all this stuff can be bumpy. There could be crises, especially considering the Taurian energy of the transiting energies of Uranus and the North Node. Like, we could have food shortages, money issues. I mean, the dollar, like inflation could be a huge thing. Some sort of strange, like, or cataclysmic natural event that we can't foresee. There's so many things that it could be, but it could also be a catalyst to help us individuate into a space of where we feel that there's no choice but to come home to the body, to learn how to cultivate homeostasis, no matter how many or how shocking the vicissitudes we're experiencing. And to remember, and I'm kind of speaking more, pardon me, to like the spirituated people or the spiritual people, but we do know, like, from that perspective, we don't die. So if we can really get to that point of really knowing that, then it can help us to get our center through what's happening and make the best possible choices for what we're encountering over the course of next year and what's to follow, you know, when Pluto goes into Aquarius, because there's so much potential for us to steer the ship in the right direction. I mean, we are definitely at a precipice that could go in a very dangerous direction in so many ways. But we also have the opportunity, I truly feel, when I look at these return charts. I mean, it's no accident too that the North Node, South Node of the Moon transiting is going to be in Taurus and Scorpio. You know what I mean? Like, we have a real opportunity to sort our shit out, pardon my French, I have to say it, and just be with ourselves. The emotions of the entire collective, especially if you're sensitive, may be bubbling up. The stuff that came from past lives as we were children, whatever came through, the emotions. I mean, I have Pluto on the IC, I get it. I have very, very, very strong emotional, like, inner landscape. But from what I can tell, if we can look at the dark, the gunk, the dirt, and just be aware of what it is, in the sense of, like, not necessarily scrutinizing it, but be there for ourselves. That North Node of Pluto just keeps coming to mind to soften that natal and transiting Pluto in Capricorn. The South Node of Pluto and Saturn, that energy, and even the struggling, I would say, Venus in Capricorn, you know, that over the course of that year, and also the retrograding energy we're going to be experiencing with Venus. It can be depressing and it can be hard, and we may not like what we see. And yet at the same time, the more we look from a space of the awareness of what it is we truly are, like I was saying, like, we're all part of the same family. In that poem, that's what I was trying to convey. No matter what consciousness level we're at, no matter what we believe in or what we identify with, you know, like it or not, we're all part of the same family. That's the way I see it. And so we can do our part essentially over this year by, I would say, holding the line, so to speak, in such a way of, just don't forget that you're important and that you came here for a reason, and you get to choose what that is, even when things are difficult. So from what I can tell, you know, I just wanted to wrap things up and say, there's nothing wrong with doing what your heart tells you to do and facing what your soul is showing you, because there's so much genius wisdom in the core of the soul. Sometimes we see, like, of course, with Pluto, you see shadow, right? That can be really, really disturbing to observe in ourselves, and we're seeing it, the collective. Like, there's some disturbing things happening all over the place, right? In the world, in the environment, in people. But if we can look at it and see that shadow is more of a distortion and a signal, it's not necessarily, I mean, of course we see evil manifesting from it in the physical realm, but if we look at it from a deeper perspective, there's truth in there somewhere. So if we're sincere in wanting to just know the truth, you know, the concept of natural law, from what I see, that can help us to be softer, to be able to include and share and you know, live by those virtues in a way that when things get rough, we can find amazing solutions. I just keep thinking about where things are going with the Aquarius energy. That's where genius inspiration comes in, where those lightning bolts of solutions, you know, where did that idea come from for me to, like Kim Marie's, what were you calling it? The water, just that technology with being able to deal with a water crisis that may be inevitable. We have the potential to fix a lot of problems. I mean, there's even, from what I understand, Paul Stamets, he's a mycologist. He speaks to very strong potentials for fungus to help us deal with the plastic problems in the ocean. So, I mean, it's not the end here, right? Things are scary and very, very tense. We can all feel it. But from what I can tell, it's not just about being spiritual, but it's also about seeing how we can bring that spirituality into the physical realm just by sincerely living as we're called to be, no matter what comes up right now. Because that Pluto's power too, it's transformation, right? So, you know, I'm taking it from a slightly more individual spiritual perspective on, like, a very individual scale when I look at this kind of stuff, but I do think there is strong potential for us. I mean, you know, I didn't look at the charts too much. I apologize for that. I was scrutinizing these pretty heavily, and my brain, the way it works, I see stuff and then I see all these things, and then I've got a list like a mile long of transits, and then I don't remember what transits I want to look at. All I remember is, like, the main points here, that we've got some balsamic energies happening with Pluto, with the inner planets. like with Venus and Mercury, but like during February, we see it too with Mars. Like from what I can tell, there's some real letting go that we need to kind of at least embrace to benefit from this birthday as much as we can, with regard to the things that I've mentioned already, you know. And if we're willing to go into these new phases that will be occurring over the year too, like with when Jupiter goes new phase to Neptune and Aries, oh my God, you know, we may be able to really use that Martian energy to our benefit rather than in a warlike fashion, which might be a proclivity for anyone who's in a fear-based state of being, right? Because when you're afraid and you're not sure where your resources are coming from or what's going to happen next, we can't think clearly in the divine. It's hard for the divine to kind of come through us, and we can be in shadow. And then that Pluto energy gets, I wouldn't say wasted, but we don't benefit from it as much. So that's why I'm kind of saying hold the line and trust that we got this. We can do this, right? That's the way I see it. And so I'm going to end it there because I'm kind of on a time constraint, but I hope that this information is valuable. And thanks again for giving me a chance to just share what I'm seeing with everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. I feel like you were just embodying the Cancer polarity to all of this Pluto heavy energy. And so thank you for what you said, because you embodied softening it up.
Awesome. That was, you know, I'm a new mom too, so maybe that's helping. But
Aww.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, congratulations, honey. And thank you. All right, we're going to move on now to Chad. And let's see, Chad, can you unmute yourself? All right, we have you live. Welcome.
Can you unshare your screen, Sarah?
Sarah, yeah. Well, Sarah is
I'm so sorry.
You're fine, honey. Yeah, just.
Oh, wait, I got it. Here we go. Got you.
All right. Okay.
Great.
So while we are waiting on Chad, he gave me a very simple bio introduction. He is a counseling archetypical astrologer since 2008, and you can reach him on his website, which is archetypalview.com. And I'll repeat that. It is archetypalview.com. All right, Chad, welcome.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Daniel and Sarah. Really excellent presentations. And I'm gonna maybe just actually pick up right where you left off, Sarah, in the softening in the body. And let's see, I guess I should go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Yeah, so thanks everyone. And just to pick up right where you left off there, Sarah, in the softening in the body, and what I'm going to focus on is you know, the rise of fascism and our current rise of fascism right now in our country, and related to the Pluto return. But what I'm actually going to talk about at the end, what I think is the most important, it's one of the most important discoveries I've had in my lifetime. So right up there with the discovery of astrology, which is Ian McGilchrist's work on hemisphere lateralization, where what he's recognized is that the two hemispheres of our brain, the left and right hemispheres, they actually cognize the world in very different ways. And the left hemisphere cognizes the world. Here, I'm just going to go ahead and go to the end here. The left hemisphere cognizes the world through, like, I'll explain it this way. The reason we have two hemispheres is so that we can have two types of attention. One, so that we can locate a seed against the background of gravel, so we can isolate something for food, for hunger, to eat. But at the same time, we had to be aware of predators. We had to be conscientious of the fact that we could be eaten at that time. So all primates, chimpanzees and birds, they We all have two hemispheres, and we do this in order to survive. It's a necessary function of survival of the organism. But what's happening is the left hemisphere has become dominant. And it is the reason that the world is so fucked up, just to be blunt about it. What's happening is that process of abstracting the seed versus against the background of gravel, we've done that with everything now. Like what McGilchrist recognizes that in ancient Greece, we had a more balanced relationship at the beginning of that culture, and then it becomes left hemisphere dominant. The same thing happened in the Renaissance, more balanced, but then it becomes left hemisphere dominant. And in this case, what we've done, because the new worldview is incorporating the entire planet, we've taken the planet apart. We've decontextualized it from the deeper context of meaning of the whole. And the right hemisphere is what connects to the whole. So like when it's being aware of the predator potential, it is lunar, it is relational, it is connected to Neptune, it's the imagination, it's connected to the whole. Whereas the left hemisphere is solar, it's consciousness, it's active, it's grasping, it's Mercury, it's language, it's abstracting phenomena so that it can manipulate it, which is also Pluto. So you can see the shadow side of Pluto in the left hemisphere, in its like predatory ambition is a part of what's necessary in that left hemisphere dominant process. Okay, this is way too much for me to like actually explain right now. The book is 500 pages. He just wrote a new one. It's a sequel. It's 1,600 pages. So this is a very deep topic that I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of, but I think it's truly important for us to understand. Now, I'm going to go back and bring in how this kind of connects to what we're talking about. When Donald Trump was elected, or I should say this first, schizophrenia, psychopathology, most all psychopathological diseases, except for very few, are left hemisphere dominant problems, are right hemisphere deficit problems. Sociopathy is a lack of empathy, which is a right hemisphere function. Donald Trump has right hemisphere damage. I'm projecting that or whatever from my lay perspective, but I'm pretty confident that if neurobiology were done on him, it would recognize severe right hemisphere deficit issues. But what's taking place in him is he has Mars rising. Clearly, he has a lot of anger, a lot of combativeness, a lot of violent, active rhetoric that he constantly spews. But what's happening is Pluto is at the midpoint between Saturn and Mars. So Pluto is the id, the primal, manipulative, ambitious energy that not only is it at the midpoint of Mars and Saturn, giving him an extremely combative core, Pluto is also in a semi-square to his sun. So he is a very Plutonic figure and a very pathological expression of it. There are healthy expressions of Pluto. He is an unhealthy version. What's interesting is that when he was elected in 2016, Pluto was 2 degrees in opposition to the natal sun in the United States, and Mars was conjoining natal Pluto. So what's taking place here is that, in a sense, it's sanctioned or allowed for the rise of the Plutonic id. You should also point out here that like the rise of fascism took place during the 1930s, which was the last time that Uranus and Pluto were square, through the decade of the 30s, until this last decade, from 2008 through 2020 was the next Saturn and Uranus square Pluto period, which also saw the rise of totalitarianism or totalitarian orientation across the planet. Poland, China, Russia, Brazil, India, the United States. And particularly here, we elected a psychopath, a sociopath, psychopathic person who has sanctioned sociopathic behavior as being okay because he is the president of the United States. So and so many of the examples that Daniel gave are a part of this. And then I'm just going to point to something that just happened recently, which is the Paul Gosar, Republican representative, tweeted an animated tweet of cartoon of him killing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and slashing President Biden. And what's interesting about this is it was the Mars-Mercury conjunction, Sun-Mars-Mercury conjunction we're all going through at the moment, square to Saturn, was conjoining her natal Pluto, which is interesting. And it's just interesting that it occurred during a Mars-Mercury alignment, square Saturn. And it's also interesting, this is, sorry, oops. This is Gosar's chart on the inside. Sorry if I didn't explain that. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez chart on the inside and the transits on the outside. So the Mercury-Mars conjunction with the Sun conjoining her natal Pluto. And that Pluto is square to her natal Sun-Mars conjunction, has been for the past several years. And this is Gosar's chart. It's interesting, the Mars-Mercury conjunction for him was on his Neptune, which fits perfectly for it being an animated attack. And then the Sun-Jupiter, he's like completely hubristic about it, does, no apologetic intention at all. And then I think this is important, is Pluto has been in a trine to his natal Mars for the past several years as well, which he's like one of the leaders of the insurrection, really. And this is a year ago when Ted Yoho assaulted AOC on the steps of the Capitol. He called her a fucking bitch to her face. And it was another Mars-Mercury, with a square, not a conjunction, but another Mars-Mercury hard aspect alignment. And this one is right on her Sun, like Mars opposite her Sun, Mars conjunction. And again, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction with Pluto conjoining or square to her natal Sun. So I'm just pointing to like anecdotal, examples of how violent rhetoric is being sanctioned and brought into discourse. And just these are kind of, little examples of what just current stuff. But the larger issue is how we actually cognize the world and process it and make decisions. And so much of what you were saying, Sarah, at the end is, I think, leading to what is necessary, which is the moon, the body, relational. It's the context that's needed. I know I probably shouldn't have brought all this in, but it's so important, honestly, that I just felt like I had to. But it's really difficult to explain in such a short period of time. And not that I fully understand it. I'm just learning it. It's really complex. But I think it's helpful to kind of understand archetypally what's happening in the different hemispheres as well. One thing that is important to understand about the left hemisphere is that it has a tremendous capacity for denial, whereas the right hemisphere doesn't do that. The left hemisphere, I guess it's also important to say this, that it seems as though our experience of the world is initially processed by the right hemisphere, that the right hemisphere takes in the whole picture, but then the left hemisphere is actually it's abstracting the image from the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is the baseline of the image, and the left hemisphere takes a part of it so that it can understand it and manipulate it. I mean, that's the reason that it's doing it. And so unless it returns that information back to the right hemisphere for context, then we're out of alignment. That's where the problem occurs, is when the left hemisphere thinks it knows best and acts on it, rather than bringing it back to a more holistic contextual grounding. And the reason we understand why that this is happening is because of hemisphere lateralization surgeries that took place in the 60s to prevent epileptic seizures from taking place, and from people who have strokes in different hemispheres. And what they've been able to recognize is that, what McGilchrist has really recognized is that it seems as though this is a foundational structure for how we understand who we are and understand the world that we live in. It's so deep that like chimpanzee mothers or fathers, parents, and humans tend to hold their infant children in their left arm because it's the left side of the face that connects to the right hemisphere that does pre-verbal communication. So like verbal communication is a abstraction. It's taking apart, and that's why words don't actually convey the truth or the actual reality that we live in, because it's not actually there. It's an abstracted phenomena. But communication beyond language is a right hemisphere or product, for lack of a better word. And it seems as though what they've recognized in the research is that the reason that people and chimpanzees hold their infant children in the left arm is so that they can communicate with them. It's an intuitive, instinctive process that we do. And I guess they've done, they've contrasted this for right and left-handedness as well. And it's not going to be 100%, but it's more than average. And so what we can recognize is that it's helpful to reground our perceptions in the body, in emotions, in relationality. Here's, I think, like something you said, Sarah, about how everything's messed up. And it has to do with the way that we've taken the universe apart. It actually doesn't exist in parts. There are no parts, like the universe isn't, like we like, this is a big part of our problem, is that the mechanistic worldview, the materialistic worldview that we are brought up in was rendered by the left hemisphere. It's not an accurate representation of reality, because reality is a continuum. It's a flow. It's an organic holism, and there's no place where it actually is separate. Like, I think that's what you were saying, like we're all family, Sarah, and it's like there is no place where there is an actual division between human beings and the rest of the world and all of our lineage, clearly. But like even physics describes the world in this way. Electrons are fields of energy. Particles are fields. They're not parts. They're actually waving, even in their particle nature. And they're not actually separate. Everything is in continual flow. And it's the left hemisphere that is abstracting and particularizing it in order to manipulate it and understand it. Now, and it's important. It's important that we do this. It's not that it's bad or wrong. It's just that it's out of context. And so anyway, I think it's crucially important, almost as important as astrology itself, because if we can begin to recognize why we are decontextualizing the world, it could be really helpful for us. And I think we can understand it archetypally. This is just kind of what I came up with today. Saturn does the abstracting and compartmentalizing, the cut and dry, like right and wrong, but it actually doesn't. The left hemisphere is amoral. It's immoral. I don't know why exactly. I think maybe it has to do with because it needed to kill, like in order to survive, like we had to be able to kill predators that we would otherwise have empathy for or something. I don't know. That's just a guess on my part, but like there's something immoral about the left hemisphere in the way that it processes information. And the right hemisphere does morality, it does context and empathy. So, and if you look at Trump, he's such a clear example of right hemisphere problem, like the capacity, like the inability for empathy is psychopathology. And yeah, so when I first got into Trump and doing this 4 years ago, it's like what you were saying too, Sarah, about the shadow. This really is about because the left hemisphere is repressing all it is, and and because it does that, Trump projects shadow all the time. He's like a walking shadow projection, and we're all doing this to one degree or another. But the more we can be aware of what's happening and be relationally process that information contextually with other people in relationship. That's how we move towards truths that are grounded in reality, not in our own mind, our own perception of it. Yeah, so I think I'll tie it up there with I think the Pluto return is this moment in time where we either may, there's this potential of being overwhelmed by the primal instinctual need to survive, and identifying your livelihood, Republicans, to being destroying the Democrats. Like, I mean, that sounds super hyperbolic and out of not even possible. But I don't think that I think the rhetoric we're seeing, and it's interesting what, like, it made me think about the Mars-Neptune square, like the violent imagery and the imagination that's taking place, like, and also the history of the United States, like the passive aggressive way that we've taken on empire status is by doing coups and sub revolts and like manipulating through the CIA rather than like overt wars and stuff. But anyway, like it's really about, I think, the potential for this, being overwhelmed by the Plutonic shadow, or the rebirth, the regenerative, rebirth, reconnection to what may be possible in a really positive light, but it does require facing our shadow, which I think you were pointing to, Sarah. It's like, and I that's the way I was really thinking about it too, up until this year when I've taken on the left hemisphere, right hemisphere understanding, and it's really helping me ground, or I'm being able to, you can start to see it in society and history. Like Hegel, his dialectic is the relationship between left and right hemisphere. Like you start to see it in philosophers, and the way that we articulate our understanding of the world is in some way a manifestation of this relationship of two almost different personalities in the human being. It's fascinating. So I hope that wasn't like too far a tangent of where we're going, but yeah, if we have any questions, maybe it'll come through in a clearer light.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Chad. That was quite fascinating as a take on this Pluto and Capricorn and that whole shadow perspective and how we're living it right now in the United States. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Questions? Anybody want to unmute? I see we still have Daniel with us. Daniel, you can sure unmute. Comments, questions?
I just wanted to say, Chad, I love what you described. It's Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics. And we live in a world of, we're still Newtonian. And, we get sick, and so we go to the doctor, we go into the hospital, we get a new part, we get a new body part, but our body is not parts. It's a holistic, in singularity. And, it's a whole different mindset. I love the way you address that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's an important part of who we are. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's out of balance. And it seems what's really interesting about McGilchrist's work, I mean, so much of it, but he seems to indicate that it's a Western mind phenomenon. Like he does a real interesting analysis of the development of language, and like and his consent or proposition is that East Asian brains aren't as left hemisphere dominant. Like the reason that Chinese writing is pictorial is because it's more of a right hemisphere process. Like, and language as it was beginning, the written language as it was beginning to be written in the West, it began from the right to the left. It was written the other way, and then it reversed back. And the reason it reversed back is because it's easier for the left hemisphere to do it that way. But the right hemisphere initiated it. Like language itself actually originates in the body. It's from gesture. It's pre-verbal. It's right hemisphere. It's the body. It's the organism. Because like communication started with movements before it became verbal. And it's the verbal language in the, or like it's the alphabet itself really that is an abstraction. Like the letters are a part that are a symbol that are there to describe the reality that is, but it can never do that. And that's why, like, and this is something really fascinating. I just realized yesterday, I think, is it seems as though Carl Jung, when he went through his rite of passage, 1913 era, it seems as though he was moving from being completely left hemisphere dominant, teacher, professor, is scholastic, was going to be this certain person, and then that it became overwhelming. It was, and the right hemisphere pushed into his experience. And I think the reason we are so admirable of him is because he not only allowed that to happen, he cultivated it. He cultivated the descent, the psychological descent, that he went into soul, reconnecting with soul. And it was a right hemisphere process. And the reason I brought it up was because the language in it, he had a very hard time writing the words for it. And from what I understand, he had a whole manuscript that was written afterwards that he didn't include in the end, because it's a left hemisphere abstraction to write about it rather than the imagery itself and the simple words that are in it. Like the words that are in it they're not, from my understanding, they're not descriptive from an analytical sense. It's descriptive from the interior of the process itself, which is the right hemisphere connecting to the present moment. What the left hemisphere does is a representation. It represents. It doesn't, that's the abstraction. It's not connected to presence, to the present moment. And that's what you are in when you're in soul work, when you're doing deep inner work. You're very present with the emotions, with the imagery, with the psychological content that's emerging. So I think, in a sense, the whole culture needs to go through a descent, a death rebirth process where the egoic, hubristic, know-it-all psyche, Western European superiority complex, has to recognize that it's just a part of a whole, and try to humble itself to an I-thou relationship rather than an I-it relationship. The left hemisphere sees I-it as an object. The right hemisphere sees other, thou, sees other people, God, the world as a sacred place. I think this is a big part of the task that is awaiting us.
I hear you describing the multidimensionality of language. The astrology is a multidimensional language. Hebrew actually is a multidimensional. Each letter of the alphabet is multidimensional, holds a whole meaning. Mayan glyphs, same thing, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. It's exactly what you're describing, where it's not this static. It means this. It doesn't just mean this. It means a whole inner universe of itself.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Daniel. That actually probably puts me right to where I should tie it up, is that astrological symbolism does exactly what you're saying, but it connects to the right hemisphere, to the body, to the soul. It is the soul. I mean, the pantheon together, your birth chart, the whole thing connects to soul and helps us connect to soul in the meditative practice with our natal charts and our transits. It's a process of evaluation, but communion. It has a reciprocity to it, which is following our transits and the decisions, and how we participate. We can see the consequences of those actions reflected back to us in the synchronicities that occur in our lives in proceeding transits. And those synchronicities is God. Like, that is the collective creative, or the collective, it's the creative intelligence of the universe that's paying attention, that's listening, that's absorbing everything that everyone does all the time, and reflects back to everyone all the time the karmic reflections of our participation. And that process itself holds the capacity for a new relationship, a new understanding, a new relationship to our soul, to the depth and the complexity, the nuance, and the transpersonal nature of it. Yeah, and so it seems as though none of this is an accident. Like, to really understand astrology, from my perspective, it has to be placed in the context of the evolution of consciousness, which is, the axial period, like you brought up, Daniel. The axial period of religion, coined by Carl Jaspers, is basically he says from 800 to 200 BC, but really it centers around the 6th century BCE. The Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, all the people you name, Pythagoras, Thales, all of them were born in the 6th century when Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus were all in a triple conjunction. It's the only time in written history when they were all three in the same place, and it happens to be the axial period of religion. Okay, so that's the beginning of second order thinking, when we began critical analysis, like thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That process arrived in the human mind in the 6th century, basically. And what's interesting is that Plato put forth the problem of the planets. Why are they randomly moving? There was a simple, elegant reason for why that would be, he said. And it took 2,000 years till Copernicus and Kepler figured out that it was because the sun was the center. And that simple understanding made it a simple mathematical elegancy, that the retrograde motions. But in that process, we developed a self-awareness, a buffered self, as Charles Taylor describes the buffered self, or like the Kantian Copernican revolution, that like, whereas before the Copernican revolution, before this turn, we were at mercy of the gods. Like, you were making small treatises, but you were under the whelm of them. Now we have differentiated with new level of autonomy and agency, and the discovery of the 3 outer planets that correspond to the depth of the human psyche that has emerged in the past 400 years in large measure. And the buffered self can now engage with the symbols in a creative, co-creative participation that can help us recover our soul. That the death of God, Nietzsche caused, I mean, it's not like God actually died. It was a metaphysical death in the mind of the human being because we thought we were superior to it. But all this can be seen as a process of individuation. The initiate going out from the community of being by thinking it figured out a mystery that mom and dad didn't know and the religions didn't know, that the earth wasn't the center. And that's that hero's journey. But now we're going through the dark night of the soul because the reality we thought was true isn't. And the 13 billion year old wilderness that we find ourselves in is causing us to be schizophrenic. We've lost our connection to the whole. And it's like Jung says, the gods have become our neuroses. It's because we've suppressed them and we don't have the connection to them. Anyway.
So can I ask you a question?
Please.
Yeah. So I think what I hear you inferring is, the discovery of the outer planets and how that has, been the quantum leap, in human consciousness. But, I often wonder if we're still able to, step down those higher frequencies directly. I still feel that we need to have them interact with our personal planets. For us to really, be able to receive those energies. We can't take Pluto directly. It just blows us away. It's why we need, 3 and 5 and 7 passes of it, because if it was just one pass, we wouldn't survive it. So
yeah, that's a good point. I have Pluto square the moon, so maybe that's part of my visceral connection to it. But you're right. There is a way in which it really helps to have them connected to the personal planets. But I will say this, like the archetypes are within everyone. Like there's no place where you're actually not connected to all of the archetypes. Like irrespective of the way they're constellated in your chart, you have access to all of it. Even the archetypes themselves are mutually penetrating. Like that's what I was saying, like continuum, it's a continuum through and through. Like there is no ultimate separation anywhere. And I believe that we actually have access interiorly to them, not on demand and not like, it's not something you just happen, but it is possible with intention and focus and careful appreciation. And the way we attend, that's one of the most fundamental insights out of McGilchrist's work is the way we attend to the world. Because the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere attend to the world in very different ways. And the way that you attend to the world renders it in a different way. Like a paranoid stare in the room with other people causes other people to behave differently than if you stare with a loving, open gaze. It's not a stare, it's a loving, open orientation. Your energy in that room will create different effects. So like it comes down to, on many levels, that I thou or I it orientation. And the I thou can be applied to all of the archetypes, is I guess the point I was trying to make.
it's Martin Buber.
They're
Martin
all
Buber.
there in potential, and it's a matter of seeing it as a thou rather than an it.
Yeah, it's Martin Buber, I and thou.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you, Chad.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry, probably should have. It was a
Thank you,
pleasure. I really
Chad.
enjoyed everyone's talks. It was really great.
Sure. I think it was a wonderful spectrum of how we looked at everything, and got our charts and aspects and dug down Pluto deep,
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank Chad. I thank Sarah if she's still there. Does anybody have any questions or comments for anybody as we close down?
I had a comment.
Go
Not sure if you
ahead.
can hear me. Yeah.
Yes, we hear you.
So adding to what Chad was talking about, it just reminded me of polychronic versus monochronic cultures, and the different ways that relationship is built in those different cultures, and how monochronic cultures are only 10% of the global population, but it has like birthed the entire Western civilization, which has been moving global. And then I also thought about how the moon was first was first associated with the moon. The first writing ever was like bone carvings, and it seemed like they were marking the patterns of the moon, the 28-day cycle.
Yep.
Which potentially could have also been tied to women's cycles as well. But I think about that astrologically, to have writing associated with the moon, which we now would of course think of like the emotional body, and that kind of writing would be poetry, or like about the beauty of the nature and how nature impacts us, again, relational. And then at some point, writing became associated with Mercury and the mind. And that was like, well, that's where it's been ever since. But
yeah, that's
those,
a really good point. Sorry, did I cut you off?
no, I was just gonna say those were the two thoughts I had while you were.
And go ahead.
I was just going to ask Della, for somebody who may be listening, would you just briefly give us the difference between monochronic and polychronic cultures?
Well, you could actually look it up, but polychronic is the global majority. So the way everything, like the tolerance for multiple viewpoints, like, or understanding different rhythms culturally, like certain cultures are more accepting and able to hear others. And like there's an ability to engage with the other without trying to like control it or dominate it. But then in monochronic, they really have like an issue with change. They want things to be the same. Anything new is seen as like, you know, the other or to be feared. And I'm not really an expert on it. Someone brought it to my attention, but you can look at a map globally and see where all of the polychronic cultures come from. So from Africa, South America, you know, you can just imagine. And there's a very tiny polychronic culture in humanity as a whole. But what we see in the economic system globally is that the monochronic is dominating by force. And
what it made me think about, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What it made me think about, and I'm not clear on the you know, the definitions between them, but I just thought of like polychronic is, you know, multimodal, whereas mono is singular. So like, you know, having a lunar calendar and a solar calendar are like multiple ways of understanding time. But I think going back to what you were saying with the moon in the beginning, it's like that understanding of time it's clear that it has a you know, desire for chronology, but what's happening is like it's qualitative in nature, whereas time as we experience it and constructed it in large measure it's quantitative, purely quantitative. That time itself doesn't have specific qualities. Like that's kind of a modern conception of time, is that time is kind of neutral, it's just happening linearly. But we are, as astrologers, polychronic. I mean, we're looking at multiple chronologies, and particularly what we're doing is we're looking at the quality of time, the quality of birth, and the quality of time in transits, like say the Saturn Pluto period that we're all in right now, that we're just finishing, was a quality of time that was intense, that was demanding, that was very stressful. That was also a lot of moral development, you know, Me Too movement, you know, like, so like, you see what I'm saying? Like that's a quality of time that the Saturn Pluto complex corresponds to, that we're participating in, that we are also able to articulate and recognize in astrological practice.
Well, you're also reminding me of what are the distinctions between monochronic and polychronic. So the way relationships are established. So in polychronic, it's about the quality of relationship and like the way people show up for each other, and like that's what leads to relationship. And then in monochronic, it's mostly about time. Like, I've known you for 3 years, we should be this close. Or I've been your boss for 7 years, that means I'm in charge. Like, it's more about how time makes that qualitative value.
That's exactly.
over the relationships between the people. And so when cultures get together, like I've just been talking about this, living in what do they call it, intentional communities or multicultural housing. It's like this cultural difference is definitely still very present and aware. Like it exists, it, even though it's something we don't talk about. But for me, like, yeah, based on my relationships or how I interact with someone determines my relationship with them, not necessarily the amount of time that has passed since meeting them.
Exactly. Like McGilchrist points out, like how like the right hemisphere, when it thinks about, say, a calendar or time, it thinks qualitatively, whereas like the left hemisphere, if it sees January 1st or whatever, it thinks winter, it thinks cold, it thinks a particular abstracted notion of what that day will be like, rather than, or like, I think the example he gives is like, I forget exactly, it has something to do with cold in the room. I don't want to mess it up, but yeah, there's a different qualitative understanding of the way the right hemisphere orients versus the left hemisphere deducing the time as an abstract, discontextualized or decontextualized phenomenon. So I think what you're saying is right on. Monocultures or monochromatic, it's much more of a left hemisphere dominant issue.
Perhaps one of the ideas that will shatter consensus reality is that time is not linear.
Yeah. Yeah.
May it be so.
Maybe so.
Well, thank you, everyone. All right, last call. Any questions or comments? Well, thank you to our panelists or speakers who showed up. Thank you to everybody who's attending. And thank you into the future right now for those of you who listen to this recording. Thank you, EA Zoom.
Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Thank you all. Namaste.
Thank you.